Summoner Necromancer is the quintessential flavor of the Necromancer in any Diablo game, and whoever tells you different, they are wrong. They are so wrong that you came here to actually figure out what the best way to level is. This is a video to get your Necromancer from level 1 to 45 to 50-ish up until you unlock World Tier 3, since past that you'll probably have Paragon points and all of that, and maybe uniques, and maybe you'll change your mind on leveling with summons. One little disclaimer is that summoning Necromancer might not be the best leveling Necromancer builds. We all know that everybody and their mom plays the Bone Spear Necromancer, and to be fair, that's kind of boring. Playing what everybody plays is whatever. If your goal is to speed level, maybe you want to do that, but if you want to chill, have a good time, farm renown, get all the quests, do the story, farm events, and all of that stuff, then this is a perfect build for you, and we're gonna start it off with the skills. Whether or not this is your main or your alt, you probably will put the same points everywhere, but your main might have some earlier points later on, so I'm not gonna be referring to levels as you get your skills, since you probably could get some skills a little bit earlier if you have some renown under your belt. But you will start with Reap and Enhanced Reap. Reap is the main generator that I would recommend for the minion build. There are guides out there that recommend other generators as well, starting from Reap, but I think Reap is pretty good because you will essentially get Acolyte's Reap eventually to generate some corpses. The main consumer will be Sever, Enhanced Sever, and Supernatural Sever. Obviously, Supernatural Sever makes a lot of sense for minions since it does more damage for your minions, and to be fair, early on into the game, your minions will not do that much damage, so you will be relying on Sever a lot, making sure that you just slam through the enemies. And after you get these 6 points, you will unlock Corpse Explosion, which is your main source of damage outside Sever. Get Corpse Explosion, Enhance Corpse Explosion because it makes sense, and Plagued Corpse Explosion to make it deal more damage to crowd control enemies, crowd control which you will be enabling through different other abilities. Past this, put a point into Grim Harvest and a point into Fueled by Death as two passives that work really well with your corpse economy, and you'll eventually max these out later on. But you will max Skeletal Warrior Mastery. Now, whether you do this before you put the 2 points in, it's up to you really. But maxing out Skeletal Warrior Mastery is very good to give your skeletals a little bit more HP. They don't do that much damage early on, but they do take a lot of damage, and having to resummon them left and right can be annoying. Giving them a little bit more HP gives you more time to spend those corpses on Corpse Explosion. After you max Skeletal Warrior Mastery, max out Skeletal Mage Mastery for pretty much the same reasons, but also since it deals really good damage. Once you get these two, you have some options that you can use for your last skill. It depends on what you want, really, but I recommend Corpse Tendrils with Enhanced Corpse Tendrils and Plagued Corpse Tendrils. Corpse Tendrils stuns enemies, it does have a little bit of cooldown, it does not consume your corpse, does a little bit of damage, which doesn't really matter, but what matters is the stun that enables your crowd control damage dealing from, Plague Corpse Explosion and other gear stats, and also is the only vulnerable source for you early on into the game. And this is your last skill that you can fill in into your kit once you have your golem as well. You can instead change this to one of the curses depending on what you want, whether it is Decrepify with Enhanced Decrepify and one of the capstones of your choosing, or Iron Maiden with Enhanced Iron Maiden and one of the capstones of your choosing. It doesn't really matter. Decrepify is good to apply slow and take a little bit less damage. Applying slow definitely works to, give you some damage output from your plus to slowed enemy skills. Iron Maiden is a little bit tankier. It gives you essence and it can also heal you a little bit. So it's really up to you which ones of these two you get. The capsules don't really matter. They don't really matter that much early on, and they probably don't matter unless you get some specific aspects for curses, which is not part of this video. But the last skill can also be Army of the Dead with Prime Army of the Dead and Supreme Army of the Dead. Once you unlock it, you might not unlock it at this particular point into your skill progression, but you can unlock it eventually and replace Corpse Tendrils with it if that's a much interesting skill for you to use. I found that the long cooldown was too long to make this very useful early on. It does deal a lot of damage, but usually that damage is more than enough from Corpse Explosion and Sever, so it's not really warranted to have Army of the Dead, but later on, maybe you just like it. After this, you put 1 point into Reaper's Pursuit for those Darkness synergies, and these are your main passives. Max out Gloom, put 1 point into Crippling Darkness, and max out Terror. If you go through these passives, they're going to be pretty self-explanatory why they're good, since most of your damage is going to be darkness. They synergize with your minions and make your minions stronger. And once you have all of these, you can put 1 point further down into Inspiring Leader. Only one, since you probably will still have some issues keeping your minions healthy. So the uptime on this is not that big, but what you really want is Hellbent Commander, and you want to maximize this since it does give you a lot of damage. After Hellbent Commander, put 1 point into Bonded Essence, just works really well on its own, and 1 point into Death's Defense, which, you know, works into keeping your minions alive and hopefully making Inspiring Leader better later on. Once you have these points in, you'll be able to get Shadow Blight as well, which is your key passive, giving you the biggest bulk of your damage synergy with pretty much everything that you have, and from here on out, you'll start to actually do some damage. After this, max out Golem Mastery. You're probably going to have your Golem by this point, and max out Sever. Now, Sever can be maxed out earlier if you want. You can max it out instead of getting something else that I suggested so on, and just replace it and get that later. It depends on how you deal your damage. It depends if you're lacking damage. It depends if you have the Sever aspect. It depends on a lot of things, but this is entirely up to you. You do want to max it out regardless. After this, max out Inspiring Leader. By this point, your minions will probably start living a little bit longer, so this will be pretty good. And you have a bunch of other skills and passives that you will max out depending on what order you want. Death's Embrace and Death's Reach are the two that I recommend, since they do work well with your kit. You do close damage and you do distant damage anyway, so they are good sources of damage that you can do. You can also max out Fueled by Death, since you do consume a lot of corpses with most of your abilities, and you'll have a pretty much 100% uptime on this if you're constantly in combat. You can also put 1 point into Unliving Energy and max out Imperfectly Balanced to give you more Sever damage. You can max out Imperfectly Balanced even earlier into your skill progression, probably at the same time that you max out Sever, since they do work well with each other and give you those big explosive bursts once you dump a lot of essence into Severs. And last but not least, you'll probably have about 2 points, which are fairly flexible depending on what you want. I recommend you put them into Grim Harvest for more essence generated by corpses. You'll find that you will probably not want to spend that much time casting Reaps, and casting Corpse Explosion will give you enough essence to kind of offset some of those Reap casts eventually. And these are the main skills that you can go with. Obviously, you can mix and match depending on what you want. If you get a specific aspect that gives you a particularly strong skill that just does a lot more damage and you want it, you can just swap some around and use those, but this is what I recommend. In terms of actual legendaries and aspects, I won't go into all of the ones that you could use, because you can pretty much fill your character with just aspects, and I did that, but it's not that necessary. You can put whatever defensive aspects you want. You probably unlock them on your main, or you can just unlock them by doing dungeons, or essentially get the aspect of reanimation, making your skeletons do more damage while they are alive. This is the main one that I played with. It starts to get better as you progress through the game. You can also get aspect of Empowering Reaper to make Sever be more impactful in your rotation, leave about a Blight behind you, which is also darkness damage, also synergizing with your passive. And if you're lucky and you're farming events that give you a lot of obols and you're gambling them for items, you might even get aspects that increase the numbers of your summons. I particularly got the ones that gave me 2 extra Skeletal Mages, and it was really good, really fun, really good damage. And I just looted the one that makes my Skeletal Mages cast Blizzard as well. This was a little bit later into the game, but hey, I got it and they're pretty good. If you get these, use them. Don't destroy them, keep those aspects, or just reapply them to your gear if you're lucky to get more, and just level up as you like. A couple of tips to go for into your leveling process. Depending on how your experience is, you don't have to use all of these, but I do recommend you start on World Tier 1. Summoner Necromancer is very weak early on, one of the weaker ones. You don't do enough damage and you take a lot of damage, so World Tier 1 just makes sense. You will eventually start to do a lot of damage, at which point it's probably safe to go to World Tier 2 to get a little bit more XP. Early on, don't fret too much about not having a lot of damage from your skeletons and your minions in general. They don't do that much early on. You'll be relying on Corpse Explosion and Sever. As for the actual minions that you should get for your Skeletal Warriors, get Skirmishers with 1 extra Skeletal up, since it does synergize really well with your skills. For Skeletal Mages, get the Shadow ones that do an extra bolt every 5th attack. Shadow is obviously really cool and works well with your synergies, but choose a different one if you so like to. The Golem, the best one to take is the Iron undisputedly, but until you unlock Iron, the Bone one with the Shedding of the Corpse upgrade is probably the first one that you should get. After that, as soon as you unlock Blood, get the Blood with the passive to have it take less damage and deal more damage while it's healthy. That's going to be really good for its active ability. And the Iron one, once you unlock it, is definitely the best with the Vulnerable ability, since it is your second source of vulnerability with this build. and it's gonna help your rotation and deal a lot of damage to big elite packs later on to the game really well. In terms of upgrading your armor, I do recommend you always upgrade all of your armor pieces, specifically if they have good stats and even plus to skills that you use. For your weapons, always upgrade your weapons up until they start to cost Veiled Crystals. Veiled Crystals is one of the rarer materials, but if this is your alt, you probably have hundreds of them stashed from your main, and they're easily to get from rare items. I would still upgrade the weapon even if it chooses Veiled Crystals and stop at the point where you're being asked for legendary materials. I would probably save those for later on. You're going to need them later on, so don't go too ham on those. And especially upgrade your weapon if you do put aspects on it, since you do want to keep it for longer, and having it at a higher item power is definitely gonna do that. And this is how you level your Necromancer. It starts to deal really good damage later on into the game, but early on you do have to rely on Sever and Corpse Explosion, which was something that I was not expecting, but it was okay either way. Once again, this is up to level 45, 50-ish when you unlock World Tier 3 and you start putting Paragon points. At that point, you're probably going to refine your endgame build. It will depend a lot on the uniques that you want to play, and maybe you'll even want to swap from minions into something else. Thank you for watching the video, hope it was helpful, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.